Sometimes I get to talk with the sound designer, sometimes I don't. Sometimes the sound designer comes in at the end and sort of starts to merge music and sound design in the world of the show. So I've just finished a show for HBO called The Night Of, and that employs a lot of sound design and a lot of music, and I never spoke to the sound designer. They took my score, pulled apart some of it, and then merged it with the sound design, and it was a very interesting way to go about doing it. Now with Fargo, it's exactly the opposite. We talk a lot about how sound design and score will work together. I've taken elements of the sound design and incorporated it into my score. In season 1, it was the sound of a washing machine. In season 2, it was the sound of a typewriter. So it really depends, on any given project, it can be one or the other. Well, I think that it's a mixture of both. Like with Fargo, I've went out and recorded stuff myself. Sometimes you find various things around the house, or various libraries, or various sample libraries that you like to find and sort of mess with the tonality of things. But a lot of times most of the time I'd like to think that it's sort of custom made for whatever project it is I'm working on. Let's talk about Shameless for a second. So Shameless has used many different composers.
Okay.
I've written music for episodes of Shameless alongside composers like Phil Eisler, who's also written music for. So there was never a composer for the show. The way they like to work is they need music, they call somebody to write something.
Right.
I happen to be really good friends with one of the editors. And he called me on a couple of different occasions. He's like, I really need some music for this, I really need some music for that. Can you write something for me? Here's the picture. So I did. So in that way, I don't want to come across as the guy who does the music for that show. I have written music for that show, and it was a fun time because it's a really fun show to work on. Yeah, I think that the idea actually is to not do that, and that's why they don't have a composer. That they sort of wanted to let anything be able to happen.
Right.
So I didn't do that. They sent me an episode and said, we really need this music for the end piece. So they sent me the end piece. They told me what they wanted it to sound like, the type of music, and I just wrote a piece of music and they put it in the show. Okay, so Smash, here was the other thing. So at some point after the first season, they wanted to switch composers. And they asked me to write a bunch of music for the show, and then they asked a couple of different composers to write a couple of pieces for the show. Now, I didn't end up going on to be the composer in season 2, but the music that I had written for the show ended up in the show.
Okay.
So, in that way, I became an additional music composer for that show. Interestingly, I didn't. The scenes that I had to deal with didn't really have any songs in them, so I got to just write dramatic underscore.
Right.
And I didn't really have to dovetail into a song or come out of a song. It was just sort of standalone drama. So I didn't treat it like anything out of the ordinary for me. So in season 1 and season 2 it was totally different, and we abandoned all the themes from season 1 except for the main theme and wrote all new themes for season 2 because the way I write and the way Noah writes is very character based, and those themes were so intricately tied to the characters of season 1 that we couldn't play them in season 2 without feeling like they were out of place. So I just wrote all new themes in the same world as the score, because really the thing that we wanted to keep from season 1 into season 2 was the theme of the show, the overall geographical theme for the show. And that was the main crux of trying to get from season 1 to season 2, and I'm sure I'll do the same thing for season 3, which is probably write all new themes and then develop a way to transition the season 1 and season 2 overall theme into season 3, which is no. And that's because, from a timeline perspective, it wouldn't have existed yet, right? So the themes that I created for Allison, for Allison's character, were for her as an adult, and those themes wouldn't have necessarily applied to her as a child. Not to mention her character in 2 had a very low impact on the show. Like, it was a pivotal and important character, but it didn't really apply to the storyline.
Right. So she wouldn't really get a theme.
So the family had a theme, but it was different. It was a different family because
Right.
it was Allison's father, and you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
so it didn't really apply. We really needed to come up with a different set of themes. Well, from a writing standpoint, it's a dream come true because there's no commercial breaks. It's like writing mini movies, which that's what we want to do. You know, that's how I treat Fargo. And Fargo, we have commercial breaks, but I don't write with that in mind. But putting it on Netflix or Hulu or any of these streaming services, or like even HBO, which is non-ad revenue based, from a creative standpoint, it's much better because we get to just think about that, and we don't have to think about how to get in and out of different acts, you know. So I like doing that more, I would say. In terms of how it affects it creatively overall, I don't really know the answer to that question. No, sometimes I am. Fargo, I record with a live orchestra. The night of, I recorded with a live orchestra. I do a show for CBS right now called American Gothic. I'm recording that with a live orchestra. You know, it depends on whether or not it's really meaningful to the show, you know. I do a show for ABC called Time After Time, which will also record with a live orchestra. I've done many shows that are all in the box, you know, so it really just depends on the kind of score you're trying to create. You know, I really am drawn to cello. I'm drawn to viola for some reason. I have an affinity for a low frequency thing, and I don't know why that is. I think it's maybe being in a rock band for my whole career that I have this feeling that I really like, and I employ that in a lot of my scores. So a lot of times people are like, no, don't use cello. I'm like, okay, I won't use cello. But I am drawn to that. Well, you know, I feel like it's influenced it in 2 ways. One, as a songwriter, I sort of look at a score as the dialogue being my lyrics, and I'm just sort of trying to write around that. On the other hand, it's also being in a band for 20 years has informed my ability to collaborate. You know, because being a composer is a collaborative effort. Even if you're sitting in a room by yourself, you're still collaborating with filmmakers and producers and editors. There's all this collaboration going on. So the ability to communicate with unique personalities is important in the ability to be a composer. And I think I learned a lot of that from being in a band with unique and complicated persons. You know, E.T. has got to be one of my favorite scores of all time. Psycho is one of my favorite scores of all time. I mean, Taxi Driver is one of my favorite scores of all time. There's so many. You know, Inception is one of my favorite scores of all time. There are many, many, many super amazing scores. So there really isn't. There's a long list, I would say, but those are among my favorites.